Ever felt that thrill when Sonic zooms through those shiny gold rings? Or the buzz of tearing open a gift to find a Sega Genesis on Christmas morning? Back in the heydays of gaming, Sega was huge. It was more than just a name. It was a legend that stood toe-to-toe with the big players, capturing our hearts.
The new 16-bit game machines from NEC and Sega are challenging Nintendo.
But even though Sega was once the king, ruling over 65% of the 16-bit console world, there's a big question that's got us all scratching our heads in wonder. How did Sega, the hero of our gaming memories, just tumble down so fast? Stick around as we dive into the tale of how this gaming giant lost its crown. In the late 80s, the world of video games was like a giant playground, and Nintendo was the big kid on the block. If you had a game console at home, chances are it was the NES, and you were probably playing Mario. Nintendo was dominating so bad they had a whopping 98% of the market. But then, Sega showed up. Sega was already a big deal in arcades, but breaking into the home gaming scene in America? That was a whole different game. Sega needed something special, a real game changer. Enter Tom Kalinske, a guy who wasn't afraid to shake things up. He was ready to take on Nintendo and make some noise. Kalinske had a golden touch when it came to changing Sega's game plan in America. He came up with what's known as the Battle Plan, in which he had a 5-point plan. 1. Drop the price of the Genesis to compete with the NES. 2. Get Sega's Mario. 3. Get more sports games. 4. Target a different demographic. 5. Make fun of Nintendo. And so he dropped the price of the Sega Genesis from $249 to $189, just $11 less than the NES. But just having a lower price wasn't enough to beat Nintendo. Sega needed a star, a character who could race into people's hearts and make a name for himself like Mario did. And that's how Sonic the Hedgehog zoomed into the picture. Sonic wasn't just a cool character, he was a sign of how fast and bold Sega was. But Sega's plan was more than just having Sonic or better prices. While Nintendo was winning over kids, Sega aimed for the older crowd, the teenagers and young adults. Sega wasn't just selling a game console, it was selling a cool vibe, a way to show you were a bit more daring and different if you played on a Genesis. Then, Sega came out with a slogan that was like a battle shout. Genesis does what Nintendo don't. This wasn't just a catchy line for ads, it was like throwing down the gauntlet. Sega was bold, especially with their sports games like John Madden Football, which we all now know as Madden NFL. They weren't just playing the game, they were changing the rules, loud and proud. By 1992, something crazy happened. Sega's insane battle plan worked, and the underdog now had 65% of the 16-bit console market. For 4 Christmases in a row, the Sega Genesis didn't just go toe-to-toe with Nintendo. It actually did better. This was a huge deal in the world of video games. But, as the saying goes, what goes up must come down. In our tale of gaming giants, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. So, what caused Sega's big drop? This story isn't just about the rise and fall of a gaming empire. It's a lesson in the crucial importance of evolving and learning. In a world where trends and technology shift overnight, the key to success, whether in gaming or any field, is continuous learning and adaptation. But how do you keep your skills sharp and relevant when trends, technologies, and industries change overnight? Traditional education often lags, creating a gap in acquiring cutting-edge skills. This gap is what separates those who thrive from those who fall behind. Which is why I'm thrilled to have Skillshare sponsor this video. Skillshare is an online community offering thousands of classes across fields like design, business, and technology. With Skillshare, you get hands-on learning from top experts, keeping you at the cutting edge in your field. With Skillshare, you're in control. Tune in and level up at your own pace, transforming from a dabbler to a master in hours, not years. With over 28,000 online classes, you have an extensive library at your disposal. But it's the 60,000 plus student projects that truly set Skillshare apart, offering you real-world applications of what you learn. Plus, classes are taught by industry leaders, eager to share not just their tools and techniques, but also their inspiring professional journeys. And as a part of our special collaboration with Skillshare, you can get 1 free month of unlimited access. That's right, 1 whole month to explore thousands of creative hands-on classes. To get started, click the link below to grab your free month of Skillshare and start transforming your skills today. That's a 30-day free membership to Skillshare with the link below. Your future self will thank you. In the 90s, Sega, feeling pretty good about its success, started to get a bit lost. This gaming giant, once known for being super sharp and coming up with cool new ideas, made a huge mistake. Sega created console add-ons which made for a lot of confusion, and there were some technical issues. For example, their CD-ROM add-on for their consoles was created as a promise to consumers that they could play interactive movies. However, there were huge technical issues. Some report the CD add-on bursting into flames because the attachment overheated the drives. Despite this failure, they doubled down with console add-ons with their 32X. It was supposed to boost the Genesis capabilities to 32-bit gaming in hopes of competing with Atari's 64-bit Jaguar console. Yet once again, their 32X add-on had a lack of functionality. Also, they released the 32X a year before their Sega Saturn, which meant that they diverted resources away from what should have got most of the attention, the Saturn. Therefore, they simultaneously sank their next-gen console while delivering a subpar product. The Saturn's rough ride got worse because of its messy launch in North America in May 1995. Sega decided to release it early, way ahead of the planned September launch. They rushed it in hopes of diverting attention away from other competitors by thinking that if they released early, people would jump to their product first. But this was not what happened. So not only did they divert resources away from the Saturn during development to make the failed 32X, they rushed its release. This surprise move upset both stores and gamers. Plus, the Saturn was priced at $399, which was a lot more than Sony's PlayStation. So when it came to competing, Sega was kind of like a boxer in the ring without enough punch. In response to this, Sega thought it would be a good idea to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. They released console after console, add-on after add-on, and they had the Sega Genesis, Sega CD, 32X, Game Gear, Master System, the Saturn, and others, hoping that one of them would capture the public's attention. During all this chaos, Tom Kalinske, the guy who had helped Sega make a big comeback in America, was not seeing eye to eye with Sega's bosses in Japan. When he left in 1996, it was like the end of an era. It was a time when the disagreements inside Sega started to really weaken the company. The Saturn not doing well was a big setback for Sega. Sony's PlayStation and Nintendo's N64 were selling like crazy, making the Saturn look pretty weak in comparison. Things got so tough money-wise that Sega's chairman, Isao Okawa, had to use his own money to help the company stay in the game. But Sega wasn't ready to give up. The new CEO, Shoichiro Irimajiri, was all set to turn things around. He did something pretty daring. He split the company into 9 separate studios, each led by someone who knew a lot about arcade games. Meanwhile, Microsoft, which was getting interested in video games, started talking about maybe buying Sega. These talks were kind of tricky, and there were different stories about what was really going on. While all this was happening, Sega brought out its last big game console, the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast was a solid piece of tech. It had a good price, a strong processor, and even came with a dial-up modem for online gaming. But the world of gaming was shifting. Big game companies like Electronic Arts and Squaresoft were playing it safe and did not want to develop for Sega. They were waiting to see what Sony would do next. Sega, wanting to really make a splash, put a lot of money into unique games like Shenmue and Space Channel 5. But there were big problems ahead. The Dreamcast had some manufacturing troubles when it launched in Japan, and then Sony's PlayStation 2 came out. The PS2 was really impressive and quickly started to overshadow what Sega was doing. The issues the Dreamcast faced in Japan were a sign of what was going to happen all over the world. In the US, the Dreamcast's launch was a ray of hope. Bernie Stolar and Peter Moore did a great job launching it, but it was like they were swimming against a strong current. The gaming world was kind of in a waiting mode, everyone looking out for what else the PlayStation 2 would bring. By January 2001, Sega had to make a tough call. They decided to stop making the Dreamcast. The company was hurting from losing money and the death of its chairman. There was also a lot of tension between the Sega teams in America and Japan. Peter Moore was trying hard to figure out a new direction for Sega, now that they weren't going to make consoles anymore. Things were looking pretty bad. When they did focus groups in San Francisco, the feedback was tough to hear. Sega, which used to be seen as super cool, was now viewed as kind of old and not really connecting with younger gamers. This was hard for the Sega veterans to accept. In fact, a Sega executive claimed the focus group was rigged, and that the results could not have been true. As we moved into the 2000s, things didn't get any easier for Sega. In Japan, more and more young people were getting into mobile phones with texting capabilities, which meant fewer of them were interested in video games. Plus, everyone was waiting for the new consoles from big names like Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. This meant even fewer sales for Sega, and their profits really took a nosedive. In 2003, a company called Sammy Corporation came to the rescue and bought a big part of Sega. Sega, a name that used to be all about cool new ideas and fierce competition, was now facing a huge challenge. It was time for them to completely change their game in an industry they had been a big part of for so long. It was like the stage was set for Sega to make a major comeback, but in a whole new way. As we moved further into the 21st century, Sega's story really started to change, especially when Hisao Oguchi became the leader. Oguchi, who loved making games, found himself in a tough spot. He had to balance the creative dreams of famous game designers like Yuji Naka and Yu Suzuki with the reality of not having a lot of money to spend. The days when Sega's creative geniuses could do whatever they wanted were fading away. Under Sammy's push to make more money, Oguchi had to make big changes in how the company was organized. This led to the closing of several of Sega's independent studios, like United Game Artists and Smilebit. These changes had big impacts. Visual Concepts was sold, and well-known creators like Naka and Suzuki ended up leaving Sega. It really was the end of an important chapter in Sega's history. The big changes at Sega weren't just about bringing things together. They were about staying afloat. Letting go of employees and shutting down arcades in Japan showed how Sega was changing from a huge gaming company to something smaller and more focused under Sammy's control. After they stopped making the Dreamcast, Sega really struggled to figure out who they were. When they closed their San Francisco office in 2015 and 300 people lost their jobs worldwide, it was a clear sign of the tough times they were going through. Without their own gaming console, Sega's once sharp image started to get fuzzy. They had a hard time staying important in a world where they weren't the big innovators in gaming hardware anymore. Sega is still around and making games, but their role in the gaming world isn't what it used to be. A lot of their games are made by other companies now, which is a big change from when they used to come up with everything themselves. Sega's journey is a big lesson for the gaming world. You've got to be able to change to keep going. Some people think that even though it was hard, Sega's choice to switch things up might have been the only way they could stay alive. Sega's story kind of reminds us of what happened to Blockbuster. Both were huge in their fields, but they got so caught up in trying to beat the competition that they forgot about their most important player, the customer. Sega was so focused on beating its rivals that it lost track of what gamers really wanted. This mistake is a lot like how Blockbuster missed the boat when Netflix came along, because they didn't see how customer habits were changing. Sega's story is like a colorful tapestry made of big dreams, fierce competition, and the need to keep changing. It's a story that really shows how tough and fast-moving the world of video games is. When Sega was climbing to the top, they were changing the game. But as they started to fall, they taught us a big lesson. In a world where technology and what people want are always changing, being quick to adapt and really focusing on the customer aren't just good things to have, they're essential.